Okay, today is the 28th of April, 2015. The topic is the Iranian Revolution and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, 1979-1980. My guest is David Dewitt, Athens News reporter, and I am Robert Whaley, retired historian from Ohio University, and this is called the Athens Speakout, number 329. Now, the first order of business is to look at a map of Iran. And it's shown on this screen now. No, that's Afghanistan. Let's try again. No, that's Caspian. Here's Iran. Now, this map was put on the screen for the second time. And I want to make an apology because the last time I spoke about this map, and I guess I'm getting senile, because I mixed up the East and the West. And what I want to say now is that Iraq and the Tigris-Euphrates River, marked on this map in blue, and the Tigris and Iraq is is on the far left side of this map, which is the far west on this map, and the right-hand side of the map. No, I guess still mixing them up. Iraq is on the left side. Iraq is in the far west, and Iran is in the middle, and Afghanistan is over on the far right and the far east of this map. So I kept talking about the far west and the far east and got them all balled up. Anyway, the red spot in the left-hand side, down near the bottom, is the little small country of Kuwait. And that was an independent state, an emirate, at the mouth of the Tigris-Euphrates rivers. And that is the territory that George Bush 41, the elder, invaded in 1991 to rescue that territory from Saddam Hussein, who was the dictator of Iraq on the far left of this map. Now, Bush 41 got rid of Saddam Hussein's dictatorship in Kuwait, but Saddam Hussein survived, and it was a rather reckless invasion on his part in 1991, and he was quickly defeated in about 3 months. But there were many people in the United States who argued that the Bush family didn't go far enough and that they should invade all the way to Baghdad and overthrow the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein. Now, on this map in the middle, in the north, is the tail end of the Caspian Sea. It goes north to up into Russia. Afghanistan is on the far right of this map, and it's in the far east, and it borders. It's the border of Iran. It borders on Iran, and Afghanistan is on the right and far east. Now, Pakistan is down in the southeast corner, the lower right-hand corner, and that is off the map, and we're going to talk now about this. So, okay. It's important then for these maps to show the position, the relative importance of Iran and Afghanistan in June and July of 1979. Because the National Security Advisor at this time was Zbigniew Brzezinski, who successfully discussed this problem with Jimmy Carter and convinced Jimmy Carter that he should launch CIA operations into the difficult territory of Afghanistan. Zbigniew Brzezinski was a well-known ideologue, anti-Soviet, and he predicted correctly that the Soviet Union will probably have to invade Afghanistan shortly. Now, Zabrinsky assumed, without any evidence, that the Soviet Union was going to use the Communist Party of Iran to escalate this and take over the Iranian Revolution. This he has no evidence for. So we opened then with the fear on the part of Zabrinsky of Soviet expansion. In fact, the size of Iran, with its 17 million people, made any invasion of Iran, both for the United States and the Soviet Union, almost impossible. The oil resources were in the hands of OPEC, and you can't conquer oil refineries and make them run unless you cooperate with the Iranian government of some kind. So anyway, the supposition that the United States would soon be fighting in Iran with the Soviet Union was based on speculation and not on the economic realities. So, my first question to my guest, why did the Soviet Union then invade Afghanistan?
Afghanistan in 1979.
Yeah, December 1979, the New York Times published news that the Soviet Union, it became public knowledge that the Soviet Union was not really invading, but infiltrating.
Right.
But of course, the newspapers and the television exaggerated this as an invasion.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Well, I think as from what I've read and what I know, the USSR was hesitant to go into Afghanistan and put it off for many months.
That's true.
As the situation in Afghanistan deteriorated,
right?
In part, and Zbigniew Brzezinski has admitted that the CIA's involvement in Afghanistan preceded the major USSR invasion, and part of their mission was to support the Mujahideen and destabilize the country in a way. And so I guess my perspective, as I understand, and hopefully you can shed some more light on it for me, is that Afghanistan was becoming increasingly destabilized, in part because of the actions.
Now, I just would like to caution you about this word destabilized. Afghanistan has always been unstable.
Fair enough,
there are
yes.
5 languages and 20 some odd tribes and clans.
Yes,
They
absolutely.
have never had a modern 20th century, 19th century, or 21st century state.
Yes.
And what the Soviet Union was trying to do was
They were trying to save their communist
control.
Right?
The point is, who is going to be the king in Kabul?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a question of infiltration, because the Soviets did have better educated Muslims just north of Afghanistan. Because under Stalin, the Soviet Union took these Muslim nomads and trained them in agriculture and industrial and so forth. So they were far more technically advanced than the rather primitive sheep herders and opium. What were they doing down there? Selling opium and raising sheep. It was one of the poorest countries in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So the Soviet Union then, because it was the Soviet Union, had better, more technically advanced, semi-quasi integrated with the Russian landlords and bureaucrats, that they could infiltrate down through Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, and they could take over the government in Kabul. Kabul. There it is. That's what he was trying to do, was to control the king of Kabul.
The USSR.
Yeah, the USSR was trying to do that. And he did that, or Brezhnev was doing that, because he had the fear that Brzezinski was trying to take over the king of...
which he was.
So they were both had fear.
It was a power struggle.
It was
another Cold War power struggle.
It was, it was a power struggle between 2 secret agencies who had fear of the other.
Mm-hmm.
But no real intensive economic or political reasons to control Afghanistan. It couldn't be controlled. You could bribe somebody and pay somebody off. So that was the problem. So the press implied that Carter was being taken by surprise. In fact, Afghanistan was always unstable. It was never a nation state, still not a nation state. It is a no man's land. And there are dozens of tribes and clans fighting for the possession of who's going to be the dictator or the king, who's going to control Kabul. Mm-hmm. Now, Kabul is 3 million inhabitants live there, and it's one of the oldest cities in the world, and it's a huge mixed population, where these provinces out there are all divided by linguistic nomads. And the Farsis don't speak Pushtun, and Pashtuns don't speak Farsi, and they have kind of tribal wars of who's going to control Kabul.
Right.
So that's the problem of Afghanistan. Now, the real comparison of Afghanistan is sort of like the territory of South Dakota in the 1860s. The Americans used to call this the Badlands, the Black Hills. There were some American Indians who fled down there and some white fugitives and cowboys from justice. And one of the major differences between barbarian South Dakota and Afghanistan is that they were 100% Muslims. They were united in religion, but they were disunited in the imams. They all had their own little territorial fiefdom, so to speak. But neither South Dakota nor Afghanistan is part of a real civilization.
Can I read a quote that I found from Zbigniew Brzezinski?
Go ahead.
He was asked by an interviewer, this is in 1998, National Security Advisor in the Carter administration, Zbigniew Brzezinski. The interviewer asks if he was looking to provoke Soviet entry into Afghanistan, and he says, "We didn't push the Russians to intervene, but we knowingly increased the probability that he would." He then asks if he regrets anything about it, and he says, "Regret what? The secret operation was an excellent idea. It had the effect of drawing the Russians into the Afghan trap." He describes it as a trap. "And you want me to regret it? The day the Soviets officially crossed the border, I wrote to President Carter, 'We now have the opportunity of giving to the USSR its Vietnam War. Indeed, for almost 10 years, Moscow had to carry on a war unsupportable by the government, a conflict that brought about the demoralization and finally the breakup of the Soviet Empire.'"
True. And then what did the United States do later on? They get into it.
Yeah.
Why didn't they listen to Zabriskie?
We fell into the trap ourselves.
So you lay the trap for yourself. Now, looking at this second map, we have the map of Afghanistan, which is entirely different. And this map, the borders of Afghanistan, were drawn in 1879 when the Tsarist Russian troops were coming down from the north and invading Muslim territories, and the British were coming up beyond that red line. The red line is the present boundary between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and that line was drawn in 1879 by the British Indian government. And north of that line is impenetrable. It's a high mountains all along that line, and there are very few travelers who try to go over the Himalayan mountains to go from the capital of Pakistan to the capital of Afghanistan in Kabul. So anyway, this whole country then was made into a no man's land by the two imperial governments, the Tsarist government and the British government, because neither one of them could control these barbarian tribes. Now, if you look up in the corner, way up in the right-hand corner, the north corner, there's a little yellow spot there. That is the boundary of China, Tibet, and that is very impenetrable. There are very few Chinese who ever go into Afghanistan over the Himalayan mountains. They have to go through Tibet and have to get to India before they can get into Afghanistan. So the idea of a Chinese infiltration is very imaginary. The people who want to go into Iran go there through the Persian Gulf, or they come across from flat territory of Iraq, and that's the best way from the west toward the east, not from the China frontier into Afghanistan. So there are 5 languages spoken there, 5 major languages, and a number of small dialects, and 28 provinces, which are colored on this map. Can't see them, green, purple, and so forth, but you get an idea of the size of those provinces. Now, the British probably drew the boundaries of that after they drew the outline with Tsarist Russia on the size of this. Now, the green line way over on the far western corner is the boundary between Iran and Iraq. And that green line is the difference between Carter's problem. Carter had a problem across that green line because the position of, about a third of the people in Iran speak Farsi, the same language as the Iranian. It's the official language in Kabul is the Farsi language, which came from the Zoroastrian religion. And some minority Parsis fled to India. There's still an Indian Parsi religion, and they spoke the Parsi language. The language still survives, but the people of Iran speak the Iranian language. So they have an Iranian language, and the official language, sort of like Latin, is Farsi.
I see.
That was the language of civilization because the Zoroastrians had the first civilization. But then the Muslims came in and conquered the Zoroastrians, and the Zoroastrianism, or the Parsis, are practically an extinct religion now. Muslim, it's very easy to convert to Islam because it's a very simple religion. Anyway, the green line then is the boundary with Iran. And then to the north, you have 3 Turkish-speaking peoples, Turkestan, Uzbekistan. These Muslim provinces were taken over by the Soviet Union, and Stalin made them into the Turkestan Soviet Republic and the Uzbek Soviet Republic and the Tajik Soviet Republic. And then there were 2 more Soviet Muslim states to the north of that, not on this map. So it was very easy for Brezhnev to infiltrate Afghanistan with Turkish-speaking tribal people from those northern provinces, because the northern provinces of Afghanistan spoke those Turkish dialects. You got to have language if you're going to be a spy. And Zabrinsky's coming in there from the bottom of the deck, a little bit late in the game. So anyway, look at that long panhandle. It looks like the Oklahoma panhandle, a little finger, which runs up between the northern boundary of Pakistan, dividing it from Turkestan. That little province was a deliberate demilitarized zone put in there by the Tsarist government and the British government to prevent the British army from ever fighting the Russian army again. And they just left that province to the Afghan tribes. And that little panhandle or finger is still the boundary to this day. And nobody particularly wants to control it. It's up in the high Himalayas. But that's where Osama bin Laden went. Osama bin Laden went up on this red line halfway between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and they all Pashtun speakers, but the CIA had no idea where he was, and he kept running around from mountain range to mountain range. So finding Osama bin Laden was a false mission of George Bush.
Yeah.
43. Well, anyway, so we got more or less the outlines of this territory. And then I want to say one more point about that red dot, Kabul. I don't know whether you can see it. That is the city of Kabul. And then right across the Himalayan mountains is another round red dot circle. That is the capital of Pakistan. But it's very difficult to go from the capital of Afghanistan to Islamabad across that mountain range. Yeah. But it's easy for the provinces bordering the mountains to send subversives across the ungodly smuggling. The borders are all porous. Yeah, there's nobody up controlling that border. Okay. So anyway, looking at it from the point of view of Kabul, Kabul as a city was civilized by the Hindus first, then by the Buddhists, then by the Zoroastrians, where they got the Farsi language. And then the fourth invader was Alexander the Great from Greece. And he went all the way up into Iran, halfway up to the capital of Iran, called Perseus. It's an ancient capital, south of Tehran. And at 33, either Alexander the Great was totally drunk, or his army was in rebellion, because they said, what are we doing up in these mountains? We want to go home to Greece. So he was forced to make a quick retreat after getting there in 323 AD. And his Greek army then went back to Greece, invaded Egypt, and they set up little Hellenistic Greek petty states way back in Palestine and in that territory, and left a little bit of monuments up there in Afghanistan showing the Greek presence that was once there. So this changes the situation. Well, I guess we want to just point out those three provinces again: Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. And the little red dot and the hollow dot, and I think we're ready now to turn the map off and talk about the facts. Well, in 1860 then, Stalin and the Tsars, Stalin replaced the Tsars of the 1860s. And Stalin half-civilized these 5 Muslim states, and they had some communist education, some Marxist education. Now, the problem in 1979 is that there were 2 communist parties in Kabul. There was the Soviet-trained Marxist group, and then there was a second Marxist group who got their Marxism from Euro-communist, mostly Italian and French. So then Brezhnev's dilemma was, well, we have to come in there with Soviet troops in order to get rid of those Euro-Marxists, because we can't trust the Italians. We got to make sure it's in Soviet hands.
Right.
That's why he got into that little civil.
Yeah, he was drawn into it to protect Russia's interests
to make sure the Russian
region.
communist was on top.
Right.
That's why he got in there. And that was the beginning of his so-called unstable activities. Well, I guess we've said enough of there. I wanted to say something briefly about the 5th invasion in 642. That's when the Persians had been converted by the Arabs to Islam, and it was the Persians who got rid of the Zoroastrian religion and took over most of Iran and made it all Muslim, Shiite brand of Muslim, a little bit different than the Sunnis.
Sunni.
back in
It's a big difference to
big
them.
to them.
Yeah,
There's a big difference with the imams.
right.
But I don't think Brzezinski or I don't think Brezhnev knew very much about the religious quarrels of ancient Persia.
No, no.
Robert, what is the distinction between the two?
Well, they had a fight. They had a fight over the successor of Muhammad. When Muhammad died, I guess the Sunnis had said, okay, his son, maybe it's the other way around, but one of them said, the son of Muhammad becomes the leader. Well, the other one said, well, the son is incompetent. We want a guy by the name of Abu Bakr, who's the most talented military man, to take over. So who was they called it a caliphate. Who controls the caliphate when Muhammad died? And it was the Abbasid Caliphate, and they set up their capital in Damascus. And so they had a little fight about who was going to be the leader, of the religious leader. He's called the Caliphate. Well, this Isis thing is another stupid medieval fight because the Isis crowd want to bring back the Caliphate because the last Caliphate was the Turkish Caliphate, destroyed in the 1920s when Turkey lost the First World War and the Ottoman Empire was overthrown, and the secularized, modernized, Europeanized Turkish Republic got rid of Islam and got rid of the Sultan and closed the Caliphate down because they said the Caliphate keeps the Turks in a barbaric.
What is ISIS' objective?
They want to bring back the title, the Caliphate.
Okay.
And they're going to bring back the Caliphate and take over the whole Middle East.
Okay.
Well, you're not going to take over Iran without a fight. And you're not going to take over Egypt without a fight. And you're not going to take over Turkey without a fight. So the Americans are trying to get the Turks and the Iranians and the Egyptians and the Saudis, who are the four big powers, to kind of eliminate these terrorists running around the desert in Iraq and Syria. And so that's it. But it doesn't make any difference whether that war lasts 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, or 30 years. The United States cannot control these Muslim societies. It's out of the picture. But I think Obama is just trying to get through the next 2 years.
Well, why do you think they make the attempt to exercise control?
I mean, why does the CIA want to control?
Yes.
Well, the CIA wants to control the oil. And Saudi Arabia is a big oil producer. Iran is a big oil producer. And Iraq are. These are the three big oil producers. Now, Egypt is overpopulated and they don't have much oil.
Right.
But they want the Egyptian army to kind of be a possible place to recruit. And they have to bribe the Egyptian army not to invade Israel.
Right.
So it's a war without an end if you're going to keep
Right.
pouring money in there.
And one of the things I want to point out about the protection of the oil interests, is, at least from the American perspective, is that it's as much protection of our allies in Europe's oil interests as it is.
Yeah,
more so than it is our
That's
own,
right.
because they're the ones. It's our European allies who get
Right.
most of their oil from this region, from Saudi Arabia,
Yeah.
from these
Right.
countries.
Right. So EU and Merkel and Europe has a choice of getting their oil from Russia
Right.
or from the Middle East.
Yes.
And they want to have both sources because
Right.
they play the balance of power.
Absolutely.
They would want Germany in the center.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, David Cameron, British Prime Minister, and Angela Merkel,
Right?
and, well, the other player would be Barack Obama. It's my understanding from what I read, from what Chevron sends me, that they are planning a big meeting sometime
Well,
this year.
Yeah, they are.
July or
According to Obama, he wants to have an arms deal with Iran over nuclear production. The Israelis don't want to see that because the price to have Iran cooperate is to release these $12 billion frozen by Jimmy Carter in 1979.
You know, those three names I just mentioned there, I was surprised that I didn't see Netanyahu as part of the equation.
Well, he's not in
Even
the
though
negotiations.
he
He
is.
doesn't want any negotiations. He wants these things to fail.
Yeah. He's a hard
All the other
liner on
names,
that.
Stephen Harper from Canada.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
Stephen
Which is
Harper
where
is a
America
Christian.
gets
Cameron's
our
a
oil
Christian.
from.
Americans are mostly Christian, but we have a group of liberal American Jews who want to cooperate in America, and then we have hardline Zionists who put Zionism first.
Right.
And that's the problem. Now, Bush 43 and Boehner from Ohio think they can manipulate this by bringing Netanyahu in order to throw spokes into Obama's wheel. I think it's risky.
We're going to take a station.
Okay, we're talking about the problem of Jimmy Carter in 1979, in which he authorizes the CIA to intervene in the Afghan civil war, you can call it, or infiltration, which has effects on the Iranian Revolution. And I'm discussing this with my partner, David Dewitt, who is learning some history, but he is largely an up-to-date journalist. You would like to kind of summarize where we are, where we're going?
Well, so far we've discussed how the Zbigniew Brzezinski and the Carter administration, in a way, goaded the USSR through the use of the CIA into intervention in Afghanistan to protect their preferred communist interests in Kabul, and from there they were launched into a 10-year quagmire in Afghanistan that
now,
culminated in 1989.
I would like to get back to the significance of Brezhnev's intervention. Because in 1955, Nikita Khrushchev decided to make Afghanistan the #1 recipient of Soviet aid, because Pakistan was an American ally. America had air bases in Pakistan directed at the Soviet Union. So Khrushchev's thinking is, our #1 strategic asset in this region is Afghanistan as a buffer between Pakistan and the American.
He wanted that buffer zone.
So that's why the Soviets put the fate of Kabul so important. So Khrushchev had that, and that's inherited by Brezhnev. Brezhnev has a strategic plan. You got to hold on to Kabul. You got to control that capital, and do not let the Americans or the Pakistanis control Kabul. Do not let the Pashtuns overthrow the Farsis. You're going to have trouble with the CIA in America. That's what drew Brezhnev in. Was the long-term Sovietization, we'll say, Marxism of the Turkish provinces, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan.
It's a geographic power struggle.
So he had a reason for infiltration. I'm not sure Brzezinski's reason for infiltration are so long-term thinking. So Eisenhower and Kennedy and Nixon couldn't care less about the fate of Afghanistan. They were bogged down in Vietnam at that time. But the Soviet Union had strategic interests all over the Eurasian landmass. The Soviet Union knows its own geography better than the American people. The American people, because they have 2 oceans, think it's easy. Yeah,
Robert, if we could go fast forward a little bit here.
right.
When Jimmy Carter left office and Ronald Reagan came in, it seemed as though Brezhnev and Reagan had a better relationship than Carter and Brezhnev did. Why would you say that might be the case?
Well, let's talk about Operation Cyclone. Operation Cyclone is the official name that Carter and Zabriskie decided we're going to have to support Afghans against the Soviet infiltration. And Operation Cyclone, the Americans knew they couldn't do it with their own troops, was to give the Pakistan Pashtuns money. And they said to the dictator of Pakistan, we'll give you infinite number of dollars to hire unemployed Pakistanis who speak Pashtun to fight this Soviet Turkestanish group.
Okay.
So Carter only authorized $20 to $30 million for the first year of Operation Cyclone. Well, the Reagan administration keeps pouring money into that, and Zabriskie works for Reagan now, and that war goes on until 1987. That's what drew the Soviets into the trap. So it is true that Reagan had this long-range strategy of bankrupting the Soviet Union. We'll escalate the arms race.
I think David alluded to that a little earlier
You're right.
with Jimmy Carter
Right.
and
It was all Brzezinski's kind of, and it continued through.
So Reagan used
The administration.
Reagan had the money, and they could keep running Soviet Union downhill, spending money on the arms. And eventually that led to Gorbachev.
right.
Gorbachev said, well, we can't afford the arms race, and we can't afford to stay in Afghanistan. So in 1987, I guess it was 86, the successor to Brezhnev died in 82, and then they had two old men who were in their 70s and 80s who didn't know much about it anyway. They were just trying to get through their own Social Security check. And when they retired, Gorbachev comes.
Right.
And Gorbachev says, we're going to get out of you're going to get out of Afghanistan. And then he goes to London and says, we got to make a deal with the United States. We can't keep making missiles. We don't have the Xerox material. We don't have the computers.
Yeah.
We're going to have to negotiate.
Right.
And so it's true that Ronald Reagan eventually, I thought he was crazy in 1980 when he was first elected. He was going to win with Star Wars. Well, in 1986, he suddenly makes a deal in Iceland. We're both going to have we're going to dismantle the ICBMs. We're going to dismantle that was a surprise to the whole world.
Reykjavik.
Yeah, Reykjavik, Iceland. Yeah, that was a surprise to the whole world. And it was a surprise to the advisors of Reagan. Why did Reagan do it? Well, some people say Nancy. Nancy said, you got to get rid of the nuclear bombs, and he did. So the great hawk was going to have Star Wars, suddenly cancels it. Well, I was only kidding. We're going to have the START treaty, Bill down. We're going to go back to scratch.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that was, but that's the long-run answer to your long-run question.
Okay.
We'll have to have a full day on that.
All right.
Okay, well, let's get back to 1979. I think the fact we ought to bring in is that the Soviets did create a front group called the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. This is the PDPA. This is the second Communist Party of Afghanistan who is resisting the French-Italian CP. And there was a little civil war between the two CPs, and the Soviets are trying to keep a low profile until they eventually have to send in some troops to protect the front group, the People's Democratic Party, because none of these Muslims believed in the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. They were all devout Muslims. And the Pakistanis were even more devout. So the Muslims, and of course Brzezinski and Reagan thought, well, we can hire Muslims to fight Soviets. We can bring in Saudis. They'll send guerrillas up there. Okay, so the Saudis, he brought in more money. And the Saudis got more volunteers. So eventually, this leads to further deep problems in that region. Well, I guess we've said enough about Operation Cyclone here. Maybe we'll get up to a new question here. Let's go to a new question. Explain some of the details of how the CIA financed the Pakistani intelligence group, the ISI. What is the ISI, and the Pakistani intelligence? How are they installed? Do you know much about Pakistani politics?
Not in the late 1970s. I
Okay,
don't.
all right. Well,
Except for, I mean, they were at that time, they were continuing their alliance with the United States and Britain, right?
wait a minute. Britain is out.
Britain's gone.
The United States has
By
an
the
alliance with Pakistan.
Okay.
But Pakistan has had 7 or 8 generals as their prime minister.
So they're pretty militaristic.
They're militaristic and they're very Muslim because the theory of Pakistan is the Muslim state and their major enemy is India, Hindu India.
Are they Sunni or Shia?
They're Sunni.
Sunni Muslims.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the Shia is only in Iran and there's a minority in Iraq
Okay. Yeah.
and there's a minority in Lebanon. So the Hezbollah,
Right.
the Iranians have some influence in Iraq and Lebanon, and a little bit in not much, but a little bit in Syria, but that's minor.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a problem throughout the whole Middle East, and then Yemen, there are a couple of Shiite in Yemen, and that's why the Saudis were bombing Yemen.
Right.
Well, but that's really a footnote. It's the big four who finally decided this fate are the Turks, the Saudis, the Egyptians, and the Iranians.
Those are
And
the big
Egypt
four.
is caught between these four. And they are panicked. Can they keep getting U.S. money? Keep those four divided?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they can if they keep subsidizing it. So anyway, the United States spent $1.2 billion on Operation Cyclone up to 1987. And that's a topic for another day. And Carter's last year, he was really on the sideline.
Mm-hmm.
And he was losing votes in 1979, 1980. But he had to take some kind of action. Otherwise, he would be called the appeaser. So he, in 1980, cuts off the wheat sale to Russia, and he boycotts the Soviet games and the Olympic Games, and that just made him unpopular in public opinion. And Carter then was being denounced as a bigger appeaser than Neville Chamberlain, and he was going to lose. And
meanwhile, all this time, the Iranian hostage crisis is
well, yeah,
ongoing.
the Iranian hostage. I don't
From
know.
late-
Yeah, I'm not sure. I want to say anything more about this background topic. What was this question we have here? Should we?
the CIA in Pakistan.
Yeah. Do you want to
Pakistan's
say anything more
military.
about the Pakistani problem, or is that pretty well outlined?
But I think we've covered that.
Okay, well, I want to say a third question then, before we get into the hostage crisis. How does the opium trade work in Afghanistan and Iran?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, talked about earlier, the Afghanistan is the world capital for the growth of the poppy plant and opium, the
Right,
production of opium. How it relates to Iran and the Iranian, well, they share a border, but I'm not sure where you want to go with this exactly, as far as how it relates to the Iranian Revolution.
Well, the CIA and the mafia and the American 50 states have a major drug problem. And there are drug addicts, consumers in the United States. Now, in theory, the drug enforcement agent is supposed to be keeping these drugs out.
Mm-hmm.
But in every war, arms and drugs are corrupting to the people who fight in it. Now, in Vietnam, the American army was demoralized because half of those troops didn't have any clue of what they were fighting for and got addicted to heroin. Where did this heroin come from? Well,
Afghanistan?
No. In Vietnam, it came from Burma, it came from Thailand, it came from the places where China got it, okay?
Mm-hmm. So China was sending it in?
No, China didn't have to
undermine?
send anything in. The Burmese, the Thais,
Yeah.
and the Laos were all in the drug business.
Yeah.
Cambodia, all of these territories are wide open. So these guys in the American Army were getting first on pot, then on cocaine, and then on heroin. So the American Army that got out in 1975 were very demoralized. They demoralized China. How did the British demoralize China from 1790 to...
Opium.
Yeah, they raised the opium in India, smuggled it to China. The Chinese could not control the borders.
Mm-hmm.
And they eventually pull all of the gold out of China. And China becomes a satellite state. And then the Japanese take over China, and they are able to have heroin. Mm-hmm. Japanese advanced industrial system. And heroin is a bigger, well, raw opium is modified to morphine. Morphine has got a good market in the hospitals. It helps you in an operation. You refine morphine and you get heroin. That's completely non-medical dangerous drug. So the world has a global problem. The United Nations, the League of Nations set up agencies to try to control narcotic worldwide traffic. Okay? So what I'm saying is the Afghan war escalates the drug business in Afghanistan. And that's still a problem.
Oh, sure.
When the CIA sends an airplane with weapons over to either Vietnam or Afghanistan or Iran, there are pilots and soldiers that bring back drugs. Chiang Kai-shek, when China was collapsing, he was supposedly against drugs, but his secret police were all bought off. In other words, drugs become like money.
Yeah.
You either deal with $100 bills or you deal with little heroin capsules. And you can buy people on all sides. There's no loyalty in the drug business.
In other words, Robert, you're saying that's how they finance war.
That's how the underground finances.
Right.
Yeah. First it comes with dollars appropriated.
Right.
But the dollars are wasted. So when they say what happened to those billions of dollars, well, maybe a third of it went into drugs. Nobody knows who consumed them. So we have a worldwide opium problem, and Afghanistan and Iran wars, it begins to escalate. Now, the Iranian society is an importer of drugs. About 10% of the Iranians are on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So there's corruption on all sides. And of course, now according to Mao Zedong, they stamped it out. Well, maybe he didn't, maybe he didn't. There's never been any real statistics on that.
Yeah. So you can just make that claim without any.
Yeah, but anyway, drugs
Veracity.
become. In other words, what I want to say is that we have some research on drug addiction, but it's all spotty. It's all specialized. Now, one of the best historians is a man by the name of Alfred McCoy, who just came out with a new book on 2013, called The Politics of Heroin, the CIA and the Global Trade. He wrote an earlier book, The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia, came out in 1991. So he's a specialist on Southeast Asian heroin.
Mm-hmm.
But he's only getting into the Afghan heroin now from his previous research. In other words, he's writing a second book on this. He sees the connection. He sees the drug connection. But the American people want to put it all in boxes. And are we about to? We've
Yeah,
got
about
how many more
5
minutes?
minutes
We got 5 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, we've got 5 more minutes.
Yep.
Okay. So anyway, let's say something about McCoy. McCoy teaches history at the University of Wisconsin. He got a good education at Kent, Connecticut, a prep school. And he has his PhD in Southeast Asian history from Yale. And in 1972, he published this Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia. And now he's working with, doing some investigation of the mafias and trying to expand the problem of opium growing in Turkey and in Thailand, and that's still research that's ongoing. You want to say anything more about the drug question worldwide? And China, Japan.
In this period, in the United
period,
States
any
today, the increase of the use of prescription opioids in America, and I did a series for the Athens
Good.
News on this last summer.
Good.
It was an 8-part series, I believe. The increase of the use of prescription opioids in America has led to a substantial increase in the use of heroin in Ohio and throughout the country.
Right.
And we're seeing a heroin epidemic currently that we haven't experienced in a long time, and it's tragic. It affects
Well, it goes up and down.
A lot
you
of
see,
people.
it went up from 1964 to 75.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Army and the discharge of those troops.
Oh yeah, after the Vietnam War, as you were
Yeah,
talking about. Yeah,
They got them detoxed.
yeah,
And then corruption again. They forget about it with the next war.
yeah.
See, peace, you cut down the drug consumption. War,
And over the last 10 years,
right,
since about the mid-aughts, since
Right.
about 2004,
Right.
2005,
right.
heroin use has been on
Right.
the rise. It's still a very deviant behavior. There's not many people out there. There's not a ton of people out there using heroin,
That's
but
true.
it is a very serious problem for
Right,
those.
but
that
among
do.
the youth, they always say, well, marijuana is not harmful. Try it. And then the guys who run marijuana say, well, how about a little cocaine? And then the cocaine people say, well, let's go on to heroin. How do you prevent young people from getting on the slippery slope?
Well, a lot of what happens with the heroin problem, and it works differently for different drugs. Like, for instance, I would say that alcohol is more of a gateway to cocaine use than marijuana is. But for heroin, the gateway, what happens is people begin to take prescription opioids, Percocet, Oxycontin, oxycodone, that type of thing. And they build up a tolerance in their system for it.
Right.
All of a sudden, they have such a high tolerance, they can't afford to buy
Right.
these prescription pills anymore to get the same high that they were getting before.
Right.
So then they turn to a cheaper alternative, and that cheaper alternative is heroin, which is much more dangerous.
Right.
Robert, we have 2 minutes remaining.
Okay, well, we'll have to stop here with this drug problem, and maybe we'll continue on with the question next time. We'll have to stop now, and
Okay.
I want to thank you for coming. This is
Always a
called
pleasure.
Athens Speak Out, and our slogan is that debate is the oxygen of democracy, and this whole topic is debatable, the connection between the CIA and drugs and the fall of the Carter administration.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.